down to her last $472 in savings and facing eviction with her 9-year-old twins, Rebecca Summers made a desperate gamble on a foreclosed ranch in rural Montana that the locals would cross the street to avoid talking about. What she uncovered beneath the barn would not only transform her precarious financial situation, but expose classified NATO intelligence that high-ranking Pentagon officials had believed destroyed decades ago. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Rebecca Summers stared at her bank account on her phone. The screen's blue light illuminating her exhausted face in the darkness of her small apartment. 472. 18s. The number seemed to mock her with its inadequacy. Just 13 months earlier, she had been a respected intelligence analyst for a defense contractor in Washington, D.C., with a comfortable salary, a modern townhouse in Alexandria, and enough savings to fund college accounts for her 9-year-old twins, Ellie and Mason. Now, at 36, she was staying in a week-to-week rental on the outskirts of Billings, Montana, working night shifts at a 24-hour diner and calculating which bills could be postponed without services being disconnected. The layoffs had come unexpectedly when her company lost a major Pentagon contract. Rebecca had been among the first to go, not for lack of skill or dedication, but because her security clearance had been abruptly suspended following questions about a report she'd submitted highlighting potential vulnerabilities in a classified communications network. Her concerns had been dismissed as excessively cautious and potentially alarmist by senior management who were eager to deliver a favorable assessment to military officials. Without an active security clearance, Rebecca had become toxic in the intelligence community. Her former colleagues avoided her calls, and potential employers mysteriously lost interest after initial interviews. With savings dwindling rapidly and no prospects in D.C., she'd made the difficult decision to move back to Montana, where she had grown up and where living costs were significantly lower. "You could stay with us, honey," her mother had suggested, during their weekly video call. "The kids would love being close to their grandparents. There's plenty of room." But pride and a fierce determination to maintain independence kept Rebecca from accepting that lifeline. She had built her career on self-reliance and analytical thinking. The thought of retreating to her childhood bedroom felt like the ultimate admission of failure. She was determined to find her own solution, to show her children that setbacks were temporary and that resilience mattered more than circumstance. As she sat at their small kitchen table reviewing the final eviction notice, they had exactly 10 days to vacate. Rebecca scrolled absently through local property listings on her phone. Most were well beyond her means, even with Montana's relatively affordable housing market. Then a small advertisement caught her eye. County foreclosure auction, properties starting at $500. She tapped on the link, expecting to find condemned structures or unusable lots. Most of the listings were indeed for dilapidated properties with starting bids well beyond her meager resources. But one property description made her pause. A foreclosed ranch 30 miles outside Billings in Stillwater County. The minimum bid was listed at just $500 with the notation, "As is, significant repairs needed, no inspection available. Property sold with deed restrictions." Rebecca had grown up on the outskirts of Bozeman, familiar with ranch life and open spaces before her academic achievements and language skills had led her to government service and eventually the private defense sector. She had always promised herself that someday she would give her children the same childhood experiences, room to explore, connection to the land, the lessons that came from responsibility and care for a place. But that had been a someday dream, not a desperate last resort. She clicked on the listing photos and frowned. The ranch house was clearly in serious disrepair. Peeling paint, a partially collapsed roof section, and overgrown fields stretching beyond. The listing mentioned no functioning plumbing, outdated electrical wiring, and potential structural issues. There were several outbuildings, including a large barn that appeared to be in better condition than the house itself. The auction was scheduled for tomorrow morning. "What are you looking at, Mom?" Mason asked, peering over Rebecca's shoulder, his sister Ellie joining him with curious eyes. Rebecca almost closed the browser, not wanting to share her desperate considerations with her children, but something in their expressions stopped her. "It's a ranch," she said honestly. "A very old, very broken ranch that's being sold tomorrow." "Like in those old Western movies we watched?" Ellie asked, eyes widening with interest. "Similar, yes. It needs a lot of work. Someone lost it to the bank, and now it's being sold again for very little money." "Could we buy it?" Mason asked with the straightforward logic of a 9-year-old. "You always said you wanted us to grow up in the country like you did." Rebecca started to explain all the reasons why they couldn't: the repairs, the distance from town, the impracticality of it all, but stopped herself. What were their alternatives? Another overpriced rental that would drain what little remained of her savings, moving in with her parents and admitting defeat. That night, after the twins had gone to bed, Rebecca researched everything she could about the property. It was known locally as the Blackwood Ranch, named after the family that had owned it from the 1950s until 2010. For the past 8 years, it had belonged to a reclusive former military officer named Colonel James Harrington, who had died without heirs the previous winter. The property taxes had gone unpaid, and the county had foreclosed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The more Rebecca read, the more her analytical mind was engaged. Colonel Harrington had been a somewhat mysterious figure in local circles. He had purchased the ranch immediately following his retirement from the military and had lived there as a near hermit, rarely venturing into town. Local rumors suggested he had been involved in intelligence operations, though nothing was confirmed in the limited public records Rebecca could access. Something about the situation tickled her professional instincts. Why would a career military officer choose such an isolated and run-down property for retirement? And why was the county selling it for a fraction of what even distressed rural properties typically commanded? The listing mentioned deed restrictions, but didn't specify what those entailed. By morning, Rebecca had made her decision. It was risky, possibly foolish, but it also felt like the only path forward that didn't involve retreat. She withdrew $450 from her account, nearly everything she had, and drove to the county courthouse. The twins buckled into the back seat of her aging Honda Civic, backpacks filled with books, colored pencils, and snacks for what might be a long morning. "Are we really going to buy a ranch today?" Ellie asked, her voice caught between excitement and uncertainty. "We're going to try," Rebecca answered honestly, "but it's a long shot, sweetheart. Other people might want it too, and we don't have much to bid." At the courthouse, Rebecca registered as a bidder and received a numbered paddle. The twins sat beside her in the back row of the auction room, unusually quiet as they sensed the importance of the moment. The auctioneer worked through several properties before reaching the Blackwood Ranch. When the listing appeared on the projection screen, Rebecca felt her heart race. This was it, their one desperate chance. "Next, we have the Blackwood property. 120 acres with ranch house and outbuildings. Significant repairs needed. Property sold as is, with deed restrictions prohibiting excavation beyond 6 feet without county approval. Opening bid at $500. Do I hear $500? Rebecca raised her paddle, her hand trembling slightly. The auctioneer nodded. We have $500 from bidder 17. Do I hear $600? The room remained silent. Rebecca scanned the faces around her, expecting competition, but found only disinterest or even faint expressions of pity. From the corner of her eye, Rebecca noticed a man in a dark suit studying her with unusual intensity. For a moment, she thought he might bid, but he remained still, making a subtle note in a small leather notebook. Going once for $500. The twins squeezed her hands on either side, not fully understanding what was happening, but sensing its significance. Going twice for $500. Sold to bidder 17 for $500. A wave of emotions crashed over Rebecca. Relief, terror, disbelief. She had just spent nearly every dollar she had on a dilapidated property she'd never even visited. As she completed the paperwork and handed over the cashier's check, the clerk gave her a curious look. "The Blackwood place, huh?" The woman lowered her voice. "You should know there's a reason nobody bid against you." "Because of the condition?" Rebecca asked. The clerk shook her head. "That's part of it, sure, but that place has history. Strange history. Old Colonel Harrington spent 8 years there, hardly leaving, putting in all kinds of security systems for a property that wasn't worth securing. They say he was paranoid about something." The clerk leaned closer. "And the restriction about digging? That came directly from the federal government when the property was transferred to Colonel Harrington. Something about old military testing in the area." Rebecca's analytical mind immediately began processing this information, cataloging it as potentially significant. As an intelligence analyst, she had been trained to recognize patterns and anomalies. The transfer restrictions and a reclusive military officer suggested there might be more to the Blackwood Ranch than an ordinary foreclosure. "I don't believe in rumors," she said with a small smile. "Just opportunities for investigation." The clerk shrugged. "Your funeral. Keys are in the envelope along with the property maps and deed. Be careful out there. Cell service is spotty at best." As they drove the 30 miles to their new property, the twins' excitement grew. Billings gradually gave way to open rangeland, with distant mountains forming a jagged horizon against the clear blue Montana sky. The late April sun cast long shadows across the landscape, highlighting the contours of rolling hills and scattered stands of ponderosa pine. "Will we sleep there tonight, Mom?" Ellie asked eagerly. "Like camping." The thought hadn't occurred to Rebecca. Their apartment still had 10 days before the eviction date, but they were paying by the day for a storage unit they hadn't yet used. Financially, it would make sense to move immediately, even into a house without functioning utilities. "Maybe," she hedged. "We'll need to see what condition it's in first." When they turned onto the long dirt driveway marked by a weathered wooden sign reading Blackwood Ranch, reality struck hard. The ranch house looked even more dilapidated in person than it had in the photos. A single-story structure with peeling white paint, several broken windows, and a section of roof that had partially collapsed, presumably from heavy snow load during the winter. The surrounding fields were overgrown with weeds and small shrubs, and the fence lines were broken in multiple places. "It's perfect," the twins declared in unison, unbuckling their seatbelts before Rebecca had fully stopped the car. "Wait," Rebecca called, but they were already running toward the house, propelled by the boundless optimism of childhood. Rebecca followed more cautiously, mentally cataloguing the most urgent repairs. The main structure appeared salvageable aside from the damaged roof section. The barn and a smaller outbuilding looked to be in better condition, their metal roofs intact. The front door was secured with a standard padlock. Rebecca entered the combination from her paperwork, and the lock clicked open. The key was old and heavy, fitting the ornate door lock that appeared original to the house. "Ready?" she asked the twins, who nodded eagerly. The door creaked open on rusted hinges, revealing a dust-filled entrance hall. The air inside was stale and musty, with an underlying dampness that suggested water intrusion from the damaged roof. Rebecca stepped cautiously onto the wooden floorboards, testing each one before committing her weight. "Hello," Mason called out, his voice echoing through the empty rooms. "We're your new family." Despite her concerns, Rebecca smiled at her son's immediate claim on the space. They moved slowly through the first floor, a living room with a stone fireplace, a dining area with built-in cabinets, a kitchen with appliances that had to be at least 30 years old, and 3 small bedrooms off a central hallway. The bathroom fixtures were ancient, but appeared functional if water service could be established. Throughout the house, Rebecca noted both the challenges and opportunities. Beneath the layers of dust and neglect, there were solid hardwood floors, thick walls that would provide good insulation, and details that spoke of a time when houses were built to last generations. The ranch house had good bones, as her father would say. "Can this be my room?" Ellie asked, standing in a small bedroom with faded floral wallpaper. "And this one mine?" Mason added, claiming the adjacent space with excitement. "If that's what you want," Rebecca agreed, relieved that at least the ceiling in these rooms appeared solid, with no obvious water damage. They continued their exploration, with Rebecca checking the utility systems. The electrical panel was outdated, but not dangerous. The water came from a well with a pump that would need inspection. The heating system was a propane furnace that looked reasonably modern, perhaps one of Colonel Harrington's upgrades. Behind the house was a covered porch overlooking what had once been a vegetable garden, now wild with volunteer plants that had survived the harsh Montana winters. Beyond that stretched the property, 120 acres of mixed grassland and scattered stands of pine, with a small stream visible in the distance. The barn was their next stop. Unlike the house, it showed signs of recent maintenance. New hinges on the large doors, a solid roof, and concrete flooring that had been poured within the last decade. Inside were empty stalls that had once housed horses or cattle, storage, areas for hay and equipment, and a small workshop with a surprisingly robust set of tools. Why would someone fix up the barn but not the house? Rebecca wondered aloud, her analyst's mind noting the inconsistency. Maybe he liked animals better than people, Mason suggested reasonably. As they continued exploring the barn, Rebecca noticed something unusual, a section of concrete flooring that didn't quite match the rest. The color and texture were slightly different, forming a rectangle about the size of a trapdoor in the corner of a storage area. She knelt to examine it more closely. The edges were precisely cut, and there appeared to be a small, almost imperceptible seam. Looking around the barn, she spotted a crowbar hanging with other tools on the wall. On impulse, she retrieved it and carefully worked it into what seemed like a minute gap at one edge of the rectangular section. With surprising ease, the concrete section lifted, revealing it to be a cleverly disguised door, not solid concrete at all, but a thin layer over what appeared to be steel. Beneath was a metal hatch with a numerical keypad lock, the kind used for high-security applications. "Whoa!" the twins exclaimed in unison, crowding around the opening. "Stand back!" Rebecca instructed, her intelligence training suddenly alert. Hidden security systems in a seemingly abandoned ranch were highly unusual. This was not a typical storage cellar or storm shelter. She examined the keypad without touching it. It was a military-grade security system, still powered and operational. Despite the ranch's abandoned state, there must be a separate power supply, possibly solar with battery backup. The model was one she recognized from her work with defense contractors, not something a civilian would typically have access to. "What's down there, Mum?" Ellie asked, peering curiously at the hatch. "I'm not sure," Rebecca replied honestly, "but we should be cautious. Let's continue exploring the rest of the property first." She carefully lowered the concrete cover back into place, her mind racing with questions. Why would a retired military officer install a high-security hatch in a barn on an otherwise unremarkable ranch? And why was the property being virtually given away at auction, with specific restrictions against excavation? They spent the remainder of the afternoon exploring the outbuildings and immediate surroundings. The smaller structure behind the barn turned out to be a generator shed, housing not only a commercial-grade generator, but also an impressive array of solar panels and battery storage. Far more power capacity than a single resident would typically need. By early evening, they had completed an initial assessment of their new property. The house was barely habitable, but could be made minimally functional with some immediate repairs to the roof and windows. The water pump worked when they tested, it producing clear, cold water that would need to be tested for safety. The generator started on the first try, providing electricity that could be used until they determined how to access the solar system. "Can we stay here tonight, Mom? Please?" the twins begged, already imagining adventures in their new home. Rebecca considered their options. They had sleeping bags in the car from weekend camping trips. The April night would be cold, but not freezing. With no functional bathroom, it would be challenging, but not impossible for one night. "Okay," she agreed, "but just for tonight. Tomorrow we start figuring out how to make this place actually livable." They returned to the car to retrieve their emergency supplies: sleeping bags, battery-powered lanterns, bottled water, and food. Rebecca was grateful for her habit of keeping the car stocked for emergencies, a practice that had seemed excessive to her city friends, but was standard procedure for anyone who grew up in rural Montana. As they set up their makeshift camp in the living room, clearing dust from a corner near the fireplace, Rebecca's mind raced with practical concerns. The roof would need immediate attention before the next rainfall. The windows needed to be secured. For safety, the plumbing would require inspection, and the electrical system would need upgrading. Those were just the basics needed for habitation, not even addressing the cosmetic renovations. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" Mason asked, arranging his sleeping bag near the fireplace where Rebecca had confirmed the chimney was clear. "Enough for a small fire. Just making lists in my head," Rebecca admitted. "This place needs a lot of work before it's really livable." "I think it's perfect already," Ellie said, looking around the dusty room illuminated by their lanterns. "It just needs us to love it again." Rebecca felt her throat tighten with emotion. Her children's perspective was exactly what she needed, a reminder that beneath the overwhelming practical challenges lay an opportunity to build something meaningful. Their optimism was contagious, helping her see possibilities where she had initially seen only problems. As darkness fell, they ate sandwiches on the covered porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. Despite the uncertainty of their situation, Rebecca felt a strange sense of peace settling over her. They had a roof over their heads, albeit one that leaked in places. They had land, wild and untamed as it currently was. Most importantly, they had possibilities that hadn't existed yesterday. "Look, Mom," Mason pointed to the western sky where the first stars were appearing. "You can see so many more stars here than in the city." The night sky in rural Montana was spectacular, a vast canopy of stars, undiminished by light pollution, stretching from horizon to horizon in breathtaking clarity. "The stars are welcoming us home," Ellie said, with the simple wisdom of childhood. Home. The word resonated in Rebecca's mind. This broken-down ranch was now their home. For better or worse, tomorrow would bring the harsh reality of repairs and renovations. But tonight, under the star-filled sky, she allowed herself to see the potential. After the twins had fallen asleep, wrapped in their sleeping bags and using backpacks as pillows, Rebecca sat on the porch steps with a notepad, making lists by lantern light. The enormity of what she had done hit her in waves. She had spent nearly every dollar she had on a property that most people considered worthless. She had brought her 9-year-old twins to live in a house with a partially collapsed roof and no functioning bathroom. She had traded the little security they had for a massive project with no guarantee of success. "What have I done?" she whispered to the night. As if in answer, a coyote called from a nearby hill, the sound echoing across the silent landscape. Rebecca looked up at the Milky Way, a brilliant river of stars across the black sky, and felt a strange certainty settle over her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever secrets this old ranch held, she and her children were exactly where they were meant to be. But her analyst's mind wouldn't let go of the mysteries she'd encountered. The high-security hatch in the barn, the excessive power system, the federal restrictions against excavation, the fact that Colonel Harrington, with a presumably decent military pension, had chosen to live in near isolation in a decrepit ranch house while maintaining sophisticated security measures. It didn't add up, and Rebecca had built her career on making disparate pieces of information form a coherent picture. Whatever was hidden at Blackwood Ranch, she was now determined to uncover it, not just for her professional curiosity, but because she needed to ensure her children were safe in their new home. The next morning, Rebecca woke to sunlight streaming through the broken windows and the sound of the twins already exploring. They had adapted to their new circumstances with remarkable resilience, treating the whole situation as an adventure rather than a hardship. "Mom, come quick," Mason called from outside. "We found something cool in the generator shed." Rebecca hurried to join her son, who was pointing excitedly at what appeared to be a normal section of wall near the generator. "Look, there's a door here, but it's hidden unless you know exactly where to look." He demonstrated by pressing on a particular spot on the wooden wall panel, causing a small door, about 2 feet square, to pop open. Inside was an electrical control panel far more sophisticated than what would be needed for a standard rural property. Rebecca examined it carefully, recognizing military-grade components similar to those she had seen in secure facilities during her defense contractor work. The panel controlled not just the generator and solar system, but what appeared to be a comprehensive security perimeter and monitoring system. Some of the labels were abbreviations she recognized from NATO communications protocols. "This is very sophisticated equipment," she murmured, more to herself than to Mason. "Is that good or bad?" he asked. "Just unexpected," she replied, trying to keep her tone casual. "Let's keep exploring." Throughout the morning, they discovered additional unusual features: motion sensors disguised as ordinary fixtures along the property boundaries, camera mounting points hidden under eaves and in trees, and a satellite communication array concealed within what appeared to be an ordinary weather vane on top of the barn. All of these discoveries deepened Rebecca's conviction that the Blackwood Ranch had been far more than a retirement property for Colonel Harrington. The question was, what had he been protecting or monitoring, and was it connected to the secured hatch in the barn floor? By midday, practical concerns took precedence over mystery. Rebecca drove them back to town to arrange for building supplies and purchase basic necessities. At the hardware store, she struck up a conversation with the owner, an older man named Frank Mercer, whose family had owned the shop for generations. "The Blackwood place, huh?" Frank's bushy eyebrows rose when Rebecca mentioned her purchase. "Brave woman, that property's been sitting empty since the colonel passed. Before him, it was abandoned for nearly a decade after Old Man Blackwood died." "I know it needs work," Rebecca acknowledged, "but the price was right, and it's a chance for a fresh start for my kids and me." Frank studied her for a moment, then nodded as if coming to a decision. "Tell you what, I've got some slightly damaged roofing materials in the back from an order that got rejected. Customer already paid for replacements, so these are just taking up space. You can have them at cost if they'd help you get that place habitable." The unexpected kindness brought tears to Rebecca's eyes. That would help tremendously. Thank you. Been in this county my whole life, Frank said, waving off her gratitude. The Blackwood Ranch was once a thriving part of this community. Would be good to see it come back to life. He hesitated, then added, "You might want to talk to Margaret Blackwood at the library. She's the last of the Blackwood family still in the area. If anyone knows the true history of that place, it's Margaret." Rebecca made a mental note to visit the library, both for information about the ranch and to investigate possible employment opportunities related to her research skills. Her savings were now virtually depleted, and she would need to find work quickly to fund the essential repairs and keep their basic needs met. As Frank helped load the discounted roofing materials into her car, he paused. One more thing about the colonel. He wasn't just any military retiree. Word around town was he'd been involved in something highly classified. NATO intelligence, possibly. Never talked about his work, but sometimes military types would visit. Official vehicles, men in suits, not the usual visitors you'd expect. At a rundown ranch in the middle of nowhere. This information aligned with Rebecca's observations and heightened her curiosity. NATO intelligence operations would explain the sophisticated security systems and communication equipment. But why would such operations be based at an isolated ranch in Montana, and what might still be hidden there? By evening, they had arranged for additional building supplies to be delivered the next day, purchased enough food and necessities to last for a week, and loaded their car with essentials from their apartment. They returned to the ranch as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the overgrown fields. As Rebecca unloaded their supplies, she noticed a truck parked on the ridge overlooking their property. After ensuring the twins were safely occupied, organizing their new rooms, she walked up the faint trail to investigate. A man in his 60s leaned against the hood, watching the ranch with binoculars. "Can I help you?" Rebecca called, when she was within speaking distance, her posture alert, but not openly hostile. The man lowered his binoculars. He was tall and lean, with the weathered complexion of someone who spent most of his time outdoors, dressed in worn jeans and a flannel shirt. "That had seen better days?" "Name's Joe Blackwood," he said. "Own the land bordering yours to the east. Saw there were people at the old family place finally." "Rebecca Summers," she replied, offering her hand. "And my twins, Ellie and Mason. We just bought the property yesterday." Joe shook her hand, his grip firm. "Figured as much. County's been trying to unload that property for months. Not many takers with the federal restrictions and all the rumors." "What kind of rumors?" Rebecca asked, keeping her tone casual. Joe's eyes narrowed slightly. "You didn't research before buying. Place has a reputation. Strange activities during the Cold War, military testing that was never fully explained, and then the colonel with his security systems and mysterious visitors." He studied her face. "But I'm guessing you're not the type to be scared off by rumors." Rebecca gave a non-committal smile. "I needed a place for my kids, and the price was right. The history is interesting, but secondary." Joe didn't sound convinced. "Well, water's your first concern. That well taps into the same aquifer as mine. Water's good but runs heavy with minerals. I've got a filtration system I can show you if you're interested." Rebecca thanked him for the neighborly offer. As Joe turned to leave, he paused. "One more thing. There's been strange activity around this property over the years. Even after the colonel died, people coming at night, lights in the fields. I've reported it to the sheriff, but by the time anyone shows up, they're gone." He met Rebecca's eyes directly. "Just be aware, and maybe keep a shotgun handy." With that cryptic warning, he climbed into his truck and drove away, leaving Rebecca with more questions than answers about their new home. That night, after securing the house as best they could, and getting the twins settled to sleep in their chosen rooms, Rebecca's curiosity drew her back to the barn. The high-security hatch beneath the disguised concrete panel demanded investigation. Her intelligence background and analytical mind wouldn't let her ignore such an obvious anomaly. With a powerful flashlight and the basic tools she'd purchased, in town, she made her way across the darkened property. The barn was eerily silent, moonlight streaming through small windows to create pools of silver light on the concrete floor. Rebecca moved to the corner where they had discovered the hatch and carefully lifted the concealed concrete panel. The keypad lock glowed with a faint blue light, indicating its active status despite the property's abandonment. A standard keypad would have millions of possible combinations, virtually impossible to crack without specialized equipment or inside knowledge. But Rebecca had worked with similar systems during her defense contract days and knew they often had administrative overrides or reset procedures for emergency access. She examined the keypad housing carefully, looking for any identifying marks or service panels. Near the bottom, she found a small manufacturer's plate with a serial number and model designation. It was a Secure Tech MS-7, a system commonly used for NATO secure facilities in the early 2000s. Rebecca's mind raced, recalling security briefings about these systems. They typically had a master reset sequence that required both the serial number and a standardized NATO override protocol. It was a long shot, but worth trying. Carefully, she entered the reset sequence she remembered, followed by the serial number from the plate. The keypad emitted a series of beeps, and the display changed from blue to green. A synthetic voice spoke quietly. "System reset initiated. Please enter new access code." Rebecca's heart pounded as she entered a 6-digit code, the twins' birth date. The system accepted it with another series of beeps. "Access granted. Stand clear for hatch operation." With a hydraulic hiss, the metal hatch began to rise automatically, revealing a dimly lit staircase leading downward. Cool, dry air wafted up from below, carrying a faint metallic scent. Rebecca hesitated, suddenly aware of the silence pressing around her in the dark barn. Joe Blackwood's warning about strange activity echoed in her mind. What if whatever was hidden beneath the barn was the reason for that activity? But her intelligence analyst's curiosity won out. Slowly, she descended the metal stairs, keeping one hand on the railing beside her. The staircase extended about 15 feet downward before opening into a corridor lined with smooth concrete walls. Motion-activated lights illuminated as she advanced, revealing a facility far more extensive than she had anticipated. The corridor extended approximately 30 feet before ending at a heavy metal door marked with both NATO and US military security classifications. Unlike the hatch above, this door had a conventional lock rather than an electronic system. Rebecca examined it carefully, noting that while sophisticated, it was a model she had encountered during her work with defense contractors. Using attention, wrench and pick from the set of tools she'd brought, Rebecca worked on the lock methodically, employing the skills she'd learned during security vulnerability assessments. After several minutes of careful manipulation, she was rewarded with a solid click as the lock disengaged. The door swung open smoothly, revealing a space that took her breath away. She had expected perhaps a small bunker or storage room. Instead, she found herself standing at the entrance to a comprehensive underground facility, a command center straight out of a Cold War spy novel. The room was approximately 40 feet square with a ceiling height of 9 feet. The walls were lined with now outdated but once state-of-the-art communications equipment, computer systems, and monitoring stations. A large table dominated the center of the room, its surface embedded with what appeared to be a detailed topographical map of Eastern Europe, with various locations marked with symbols she recognized from NATO intelligence protocols. The facility had been powered down, but not decommissioned. A thin layer of dust covered most surfaces, suggesting it had been months since anyone had entered, but the environmental control systems were still functioning, maintaining optimal temperature and humidity levels for the sensitive equipment. As Rebecca moved deeper into the room, motion sensors triggered additional lighting, illuminating areas that had been in shadow. Along one wall stood a row of filing cabinets with high-security locks. Against another was a communications array, with satellite uplink capabilities far beyond what would be expected in a private residence, even for a retired military officer. But it was a reinforced door on the far side of the room that drew her attention. Unlike the outer door, this one featured a modern electronic lock with both retinal and fingerprint scanners, security measures typically reserved for the highest classification levels. Next to this door was a desk with a computer terminal that appeared to be in standby mode rather than fully powered down. Rebecca approached it cautiously, her intelligence training making her acutely aware that she was now almost certainly in a classified facility that she had no legal authorization to access. The terminal came to life at her touch, requesting login credentials. Using techniques she had learned for security testing, Rebecca bypassed the standard login procedure and accessed the system's basic functions. The screen displayed a directory of files with naming conventions she recognized from her defense work. These were NATO intelligence documents, some classified at levels that required the highest security clearances. A chill ran down her spine as the implications became clear. Colonel Harrington hadn't simply retired to a remote ranch. He had established what appeared to be an unauthorized backup facility for NATO intelligence operations. The question was why. Had he gone rogue, or was this facility sanctioned through channels so classified that they wouldn't appear in any public record? Rebecca navigated carefully through the file system, looking for anything that might explain the facility's purpose. A folder labeled Azure Hammer caught her attention. The naming convention suggested a high-priority operation. She opened it to find documents detailing what appeared to be a NATO counterintelligence operation, targeting Russian attempts to infiltrate European defense networks. The most recent files were dated just 2 months ago, well after Colonel Harrington's death, suggesting the facility had remained active under someone else's control. This wasn't an abandoned relic of the Cold War. It was a currently operational intelligence center hidden beneath a seemingly worthless ranch that had been sold at public auction for $500. The sound of a vehicle on the gravel driveway above pulled Rebecca from her shocked examination of the files. She quickly exited the system, ensuring it returned to its standby state, and made her way back through the command center to the stairs. As she ascended, she heard car doors closing and voices outside the barn. Carefully securing the hatch and replacing the concrete cover, Rebecca slipped out the side door of the barn just as flashlight beams cut through the darkness at the main entrance. She kept to the shadows, making her way quickly back to the house, where the twins were still sleeping peacefully, unaware of what their mother had discovered. Through the window, she observed 2 men in dark suits examining the exterior of the barn with flashlights. Their movements were methodical and professional, not random trespassers or curious locals. One spoke into a radio, his posture suggesting military or intelligence training. Rebecca's mind raced with the implications of her discovery. They had unknowingly purchased a property concealing an active NATO intelligence facility. The $500. Auction price, the federal restrictions against excavation, Colonel Harrington's mysterious behavior, it all suddenly made terrible sense. The question now was what to do with this knowledge. As a former intelligence analyst with a suspended security clearance, she understood the sensitivity of what she had found. But as a mother with 2 children depending on her, she also recognized the danger of their situation. They were now living on top of a classified facility that was clearly still being accessed by intelligence operatives. The twins were still asleep when Rebecca heard another vehicle approaching the ranch. This time, it wasn't the steady crunch of tires on gravel, but the distinctive sound of a helicopter's rotors beating the air. She moved quickly to the window, peering through a gap in the faded curtains. A sleek black helicopter was descending toward the open field beyond the barn, its unmarked fuselage suggesting government or military origin rather than civilian use. Her intelligence training kicked in automatically. She needed to secure her children first, then assess the threat level and determine appropriate action. This wasn't the kind of situation covered in parenting books. What to do when Pentagon officials show up at your foreclosed ranch. "Ellie, Mason," she called, moving quickly to their rooms. "Wake up, sweethearts. We need to go outside for a little while." The twins stirred groggily, confused by the urgency in their mother's voice. "What's happening?" Mason asked, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "There are some people arriving in a helicopter," Rebecca explained, keeping her voice calm despite her racing heart. "I think they're here about the property. We need to meet them outside where they can see us clearly." Years of intelligence work had taught Rebecca that transparency was often the safest approach when confronted by official personnel. Hiding or running would only escalate the situation. Better to present themselves openly, establishing their legitimate presence while she assessed the situation. She helped the twins dress quickly and ushered them onto the front porch just as the helicopter touched down. The rotor wash sent dust and dried grass swirling across the yard as the engine powered down. 3 figures emerged, 2 men in dark suits flanking a woman in an Air Force uniform with colonel's insignia. "Stay on the porch," Rebecca instructed her children. "I'm going to talk to them." She walked forward with deliberate confidence, stopping in the yard about 20 feet from the approaching trio. Her posture was open but alert, hands visible at her sides, body language that conveyed both cooperation and boundary setting. "Good morning," she called over the diminishing whine of the helicopter's engines. "I'm Rebecca Summers. This is my property." The woman in uniform stepped forward, her expression unreadable behind aviator sunglasses. Colonel Victoria Hayes, United States Air Force, NATO Intelligence Liaison. She removed her sunglasses, revealing sharp blue eyes that assessed Rebecca with professional intensity. "And you've purchased a property with certain complications." Rebecca maintained steady eye contact. "I purchased this property legally at county auction yesterday. If there are complications, they weren't disclosed at the time of sale." Colonel Hayes nodded slightly, a gesture that acknowledged the point without conceding anything. "May we speak privately, Ms. Summers?" Rebecca glanced back at the twins, who were watching the scene with wide-eyed fascination. "My children stay where I can see them." "Of course." The colonel gestured toward a weathered picnic table near the side of the house. "Perhaps there, then. My colleagues will remain at a respectful distance." As they settled at the table, Rebecca noticed the 2 men in suits had positioned themselves strategically, one near the helicopter, the other closer to the barn. They were armed, she was certain, though their weapons weren't visibly displayed. "Ms. Summers," Colonel Hayes began, "your background is known to us. Former intelligence analyst with Meridian Defense Systems, specialized in communication security and vulnerability assessment. Security clearance level, TSSCI, currently suspended pending review." The casual revelation of her professional history sent a jolt through Rebecca. "You've been investigating me?" "We investigate everyone who shows interest in certain properties," Hayes replied matter-of-factly, "especially when those properties have connections to national security." "The NATO facility beneath the barn," Rebecca stated, deciding that pretending ignorance would be pointless and potentially dangerous. Colonel Hayes's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flicker of surprise quickly masked. "You've accessed The facility. It wasn't a question. Last night, Rebecca confirmed, after discovering unusual security features throughout the property, my professional background made certain anomalies impossible to ignore. And what did you conclude from your unauthorized exploration? The colonel's tone remained neutral, but Rebecca could sense the tension beneath the professional facade. That I've purchased a property concealing an active intelligence facility, that Colonel Harrington was likely its caretaker rather than its architect, and that someone is still accessing it regularly, despite its supposed abandonment. Rebecca maintained eye contact, her voice steady. What I haven't determined is why a classified NATO operation would be run from a remote Montana ranch, or why the property would be allowed to be sold at public auction with the facility intact. A hint of a smile touched Colonel Hayes's lips. You were wasted at Meridian. Your analytical skills remain sharp. My concern is for my children's safety, Rebecca pressed. I've invested everything I have in this property. I need to know what we've walked into. The colonel studied her for a long moment, coming to some internal decision. What I'm about to share is classified, Ms. Summers, but given your situation and background, you're entitled to certain facts. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. The Blackwood Ranch has been a secure NATO intelligence outpost since 1983. Originally established as a communications relay during late Cold War operations, it evolved into a backup data repository and operational planning center for certain sensitive Eastern European contingencies. Why here? Why not a military base or established facility? Because sometimes the most secure location is one hiding in plain sight, Hayes explained. A remote ranch in Montana, privately owned, attracts far less attention than military installations that appear on every satellite image and map. Rebecca processed this information, pieces falling into place. Colonel Harrington wasn't just retired military, he was active intelligence, maintaining the facility. Hayes nodded. James Harrington was one of our most dedicated operatives. He maintained the facility for 8 years, transmitting critical data and occasionally hosting secure meetings that couldn't take place through official channels. Until he died and the property went into foreclosure, Rebecca added. Which seems like a critical security lapse for a classified facility. A shadow crossed the colonel's face. His death was unexpected. Heart attack at 67. By the time we were notified, county proceedings had already begun. We attempted to purchase the property through third parties, but certain bureaucratic complications prevented direct intervention. Rebecca's analytical mind filled in the blanks. Interagency conflicts, perhaps, or budget constraints that prevented overt action. The intelligence community was often hamstrung by its own internal politics. So instead, you added deed restrictions about excavation, priced it artificially low, and spread rumors locally to discourage purchase, Rebecca concluded. Creating a situation where the property would likely remain vacant until you could arrange proper acquisition. Until you appeared at the auction, Hayes confirmed, with exactly the background to recognize the inconsistencies most civilians would overlook. What happens now? Rebecca asked, glancing toward her children, who had begun exploring the porch steps under the watchful eye of one of the suited men. Colonel Hayes followed her gaze. That depends on you, Ms. Summers. The facility contains sensitive information that remains operationally relevant. We need to secure it properly. You want to buy the property, Rebecca guessed, for substantially more than I paid, I presume. We're prepared to offer $250,000, Hayes stated, plus relocation assistance. A fair resolution that addresses both national security concerns and your financial situation. The sum was staggering compared to Rebecca's $500 investment. It would provide the fresh start she'd been desperately seeking, enough to purchase. a suitable home outright, establish stability for the twins, and possibly even restart her career with appropriate resources. But something didn't feel right. Her analytical mind caught on inconsistencies in the Colonel's explanation, subtle tells in body language, gaps in the narrative, the strange timing of their arrival so soon after her exploration of the facility. Why not simply remove the classified? Material and equipment? Rebecca asked. Surely the physical facility itself isn't the concern. Hayes' expression remained neutral, but Rebecca noticed a slight tension around her eyes. The integration of the facility with the property makes complete removal challenging without raising questions locally. A clean purchase is the most secure approach. It was a reasonable explanation, but not entirely convincing. Rebecca's years of intelligence work had honed her ability to detect partial truths. There was something about this facility that made it uniquely valuable beyond the equipment and data it contained, something the Colonel wasn't sharing. "I need time to consider," Rebecca said finally. "This is my children's home now, however briefly we've been here. I won't make a decision that affects their future without proper consideration." Colonel Hayes nodded. "Of course, we can give you 48 hours. She reached into her uniform pocket and produced a business card with only a phone number printed. On it, "Call this number when you've decided." "But Miss Summers," her voice took on an edge of warning, "the facility remains classified. No further unauthorized access, no documentation of what you've seen, no communication about its existence to anyone. Is that clear?" "Perfectly," Rebecca confirmed, accepting the card. As the Colonel rose to leave, Rebecca asked one final question. "The men who checked the barn last night, were they yours?" Hayes paused. "We have personnel who regularly verify the facility's security." "Yes." But something in her hesitation caught Rebecca's attention. There was uncertainty there, suggesting either she didn't know about last night's visitors or they weren't operating under her direct authority. The helicopter departed as quickly as it had arrived, leaving Rebecca and the twins in a swirl of dust and questions. As the sound of rotors faded into the distance, Ellie approached, her expression serious beyond her years. "Are we going to have to leave our ranch, Mum?" Rebecca drew her daughter close. "I don't know yet, sweetheart, but whatever happens, we'll be together. That's what matters most." She spent the morning attempting normalcy, helping the twins explore the safer areas of the property, while her mind worked through the implications of Colonel Hayes's visit. The offer was generous, life-changing even, but her intelligence training had taught her to question convenient solutions, especially when they came with pressure and deadlines. By midday, Rebecca had made a decision. Before accepting or rejecting Hayes's offer, she needed more information, independent verification of what exactly lay beneath the Blackwood Ranch and why it was valuable enough to warrant a $250,000 buyout. Her suspended security clearance meant official channels were closed to her, but she still had contacts who might help. "We need to go into town for supplies," she told the twins after lunch, "and to visit the library." The Stillwater County Library was housed in a century-old building of red brick and arched windows. Inside, the space was unexpectedly modern. Recent renovations had created an airy, technology-friendly environment while preserving the historical architecture. At the information desk, Rebecca asked for Margaret Blackwood, the family member. Frank from the hardware store had mentioned. The librarian directed them to the local history section, where a woman in her 60s was carefully cataloguing photographs. "Ms. Blackwood." Rebecca approached, the twins trailing behind her. "I'm Rebecca Summers. Frank Mercer suggested I speak with you." Margaret looked up, studying Rebecca through tortoiseshell reading glasses. "You're the one who bought the ranch." It wasn't a question. "Yesterday," Rebecca confirmed. "I'm hoping to learn more about its history. My children and I are making it our home." Margaret's expression softened as she noticed the twins. "Well, history is what I do. What would you like to know?" Rebecca chose her words carefully, aware that the conversation needed to appear casual to any observers. "The property has some unusual features for a simple ranch. I was hoping you could tell me about its original purpose and subsequent owners." The older woman removed her glasses, considering Rebecca thoughtfully. "The main reading room isn't the place for that conversation." She glanced at the twins. "Perhaps your children would enjoy our excellent children's section while we talk. Amy at the front desk can get them set up with library cards." Once the twins were happily exploring the children's library under Amy's supervision, Margaret led Rebecca to a small research room lined with filing cabinets and local archives. "The Blackwood Ranch has been in my family since 1947, she began, closing the door. "My grandfather purchased it after returning from World War II, but it wasn't always a cattle operation, despite appearances." She pulled a folder from a filing cabinet, spreading black and white photographs across the table. They showed the property in various stages over decades: construction of outbuildings, aerial views, family gatherings. "During the Cold War, my father was approached by government representatives. The ranch's location offered certain advantages for radio communications, something about the surrounding mountains creating a natural amplification effect for certain frequencies. They installed equipment in the barn, initially just a small relay station." Rebecca examined the photographs, noting the gradual evolution of the barn structure over time, subtle expansions and reinforcements that would be missed by casual observation. "By the 1980s, it had become something more significant," Margaret continued. "My father was given security clearance because of his military background. He understood the importance of discretion." "And Colonel Harrington, how did he enter the picture?" Margaret's expression darkened slightly. "The government wanted more direct control. They pressured my brother to sell after our father died. When he refused, there were complications: tax audits, grazing permit issues, problems with water rights. Eventually, he gave in, selling to a shell company that we later learned was controlled by military intelligence." "Colonel Harrington wasn't just a retired officer buying a ranch," Rebecca concluded. "He was their man, installed to maintain whatever operation they were running," Margaret confirmed. "He lived like a hermit, but there were regular visitors, official vehicles, helicopters occasionally. The locals learned not to ask questions." Rebecca considered this information against what Colonel Hayes had shared. The basic framework aligned, but Margaret's version suggested more coercion and less cooperation than the official narrative. "Have you noticed continued activity since the Colonel's death?" Rebecca asked. Margaret nodded. "Less frequent, but still present. Night visitors, primarily. My nephew Joe has reported seeing lights and vehicles several times in recent months. The same Joe Blackwood who had warned Rebecca yesterday. The connections were becoming clearer. What do you think?" "They're protecting out there?" Rebecca asked directly. Margaret leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Not what? Who?" She slid another photograph across the table, this one newer than the others, a surveillance-style shot of a man entering the barn, his face partially obscured, but recognizable as Eastern European in features. "This was taken 2 months ago, by Joe. He's been documenting the visitors since the Colonel died." Rebecca studied the image, her intelligence training automatically cataloging distinctive features. "Russian? Polish, we think, and not the only one." Margaret produced several more photographs showing different men, all with similar professional bearing, visiting the property at different times. "The facility may be a safe house," Rebecca realized aloud, "or an extraction point for intelligence." "Assets from Eastern Europe," Margaret nodded. "That's Joe's theory. During the Cold War, Montana had several designated emergency landing sites for defectors, remote enough to avoid detection, but accessible by aircraft. The ranch might have evolved from a communications center to something more operational. This would explain the continued interest in the property despite Colonel Harrington's death. Not just classified documents or equipment, but an active pipeline for human intelligence assets, defectors, double agents, compromised operatives, needing extraction from European assignments. The current NATO operations in Eastern Europe are intensifying, Rebecca mused. With Russian aggression and disinformation campaigns increasing, intelligence networks would be critical. Assets would need secure extraction routes that bypass standard channels, which makes your purchase of the property particularly inconvenient for whoever is running these operations, Margaret concluded. Rebecca sat back, absorbing the implications. So the question becomes, is Colonel Hayes representing the official NATO interest in continuing these operations, or is there another faction involved? That I can't answer, Margaret replied. But I can tell you this. The Blackwood family has suffered for decades under the shadow of whatever's happening at that ranch. My father's cooperation became coercion against my brother, ending with the loss of our family heritage. If they're offering to buy you out, consider carefully what might happen if you refuse. The warning hung in the air between them, its implications clear. Rebecca thought of her twins, enthusiastically exploring their new home, unaware of the international intelligence operations potentially operating beneath their feet. "Thank you for sharing this," Rebecca said finally. "It helps clarify the situation considerably." As she rose to leave, Margaret caught her arm. "One more thing. There's a reason the facility was built at the Blackwood Ranch specifically, beyond just the communications advantage." She hesitated. The original construction in the 1960s uncovered something during excavation, something the government immediately classified. Whatever they found is still down there, beneath all the spy games and security systems. "What kind of something?" Rebecca asked. "My father would never say explicitly. The one time I asked directly, he just said, 'Some questions are better left unanswered for everyone's safety.' But it changed him. He became withdrawn, hyper-vigilant, started checking the property perimeter daily." Rebecca's analytical mind raced with possibilities: weapons testing sites, radiation contamination, chemical weapons storage. Cold War operations had left countless toxic legacies across the American landscape, many still classified decades later. "Is it dangerous for my children?" The mother in her overrode the intelligence analyst momentarily. Margaret's expression softened. "I don't believe so, not immediately at least. My family lived there for decades without health issues. But it might explain why they're so determined to maintain control of the property, rather than simply removing their equipment and documents." As Rebecca returned to the children's section to collect the twins, her mind worked through scenarios and contingencies. The $250,000 offer was looking more complex by the minute, not simply a generous solution to a security problem, but perhaps a calculated assessment of what it would take to avoid further investigation into whatever lay beneath the Blackwood Ranch. The twins chattered excitedly on the drive home, waving their new library books. Rebecca smiled and responded appropriately, but her attention was divided, scanning for surveillance, noting vehicles on the rural roads, assessing threat levels automatically as her intelligence training reasserted itself after years of disuse. When they arrived back at the ranch, Rebecca's suspicions were confirmed. While not immediately obvious, careful observation revealed signs of monitoring: a disturbed section of dirt near the driveway where a device might have been placed, slight adjustments to the barn door hinges suggesting a sensor installation, a new antenna barely visible on the distant tree line that hadn't been there that morning. "Let's have lunch on the porch," she suggested to the twins, wanting to keep them in sight while she considered her options. As they ate sandwiches in the spring sunshine, Rebecca made a decision. She wouldn't call the number Colonel Hayes had provided. Not yet. Instead, she needed independent verification from someone with access to official information, but outside the direct chain of command that might be operating at the ranch. There was only one person she could think of who fit that description: Dr. Michael Chen, her former colleague at Meridian Defense Systems. Michael had moved to Cyber Command within the Air Force after the layoffs, maintaining his security clearance and access to classified networks. More importantly, he had been the only former colleague who had checked on her welfare after her security clearance suspension. Using the twins' exploration of nearby wildflowers as cover, Rebecca walked the property perimeter, looking for gaps in what she now assumed was comprehensive surveillance. She found what she needed near the small stream at the property's edge, a natural depression behind a stand of pines that appeared to be outside any reasonable observation cone from the installed devices she had detected. That evening, after settling the twins with their library books, Rebecca slipped out to the hidden spot with a prepaid phone she had purchased in town. The call would have to be brief and cryptic, enough to alert Michael without compromising. Operational security if the call was intercepted, he answered on the third ring. Chen. "Michael, it's Rebecca Summers." She kept her voice low despite the isolation. "I'm calling about that hiking route we discussed last year, the one with the unusual geological formations." There was a brief pause as Michael processed the unexpected contact and cryptic reference, their shared code for classified matters that couldn't be discussed openly. "Rebecca, good to hear from you. That trail can be tricky this time of year. Where are you calling from?" "Montana, recently relocated. Found an interesting property with some distinctive features that reminded me of that hike." Michael's voice remained casual, but she could hear the shift in his attention. "Montana has some remarkable landscapes. Any specific region I might recognize?" "Stillwater County, near the old Blackwood Geological Survey site." She emphasized the word survey slightly, another shared reference to intelligence operations. "I see." Michael's tone conveyed understanding. "Those features sometimes require specialized equipment to fully appreciate. I might have some maps that could help." "Are you at a secure location for a more detailed conversation?" "Negative. But I could meet at neutral coordinates for proper orientation." "Understood. I have some leave coming up. Always wanted to see Montana in spring. Text me details when you're on higher ground." The call ended as abruptly as it had begun, but Rebecca felt a surge of relief. Michael had understood her coded request and agreed to come. His position at Cyber Command would give him access to information about NATO operations that might clarify exactly what was happening at the Blackwood Ranch, and whether Colonel Hayes's offer was legitimate or part of some deeper deception. Returning to the house, Rebecca found the twins already asleep, exhausted from the day's explorations and emotional transitions. She sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast Montana sky, weighing her options. The smart play would be to accept Hayes's offer, take the money, and walk away. It would solve their immediate financial problems and remove them from what was clearly an active intelligence operation with unknown risks. The rational analyst in her recognized this as the optimal solution, but deeper instincts held her back. Something about the situation felt wrong. The timing of Hayes's arrival, the pressure for quick decision, the inconsistencies in the official explanation. Rebecca had built her career on recognizing patterns and anomalies in intelligence data. The pattern here suggested something beyond a simple security concern about an exposed facility. Margaret Blackwood's final revelation echoed in her mind. Something discovered during the original excavation, something significant enough to be immediately classified, something that had disturbed her father deeply. What lay beneath the Blackwood ranch that was valuable enough to warrant decades of government control and a $250,000 buyout offer for a $500 property? As darkness settled over the ranch, Rebecca made her decision. She wouldn't accept Hayes's offer, not yet. She would wait for Michael's arrival and the information he might provide. In the meantime, she would proceed with basic repairs to make the house properly habitable for the twins, maintaining the appearance of a mother simply trying to create a home while she gathered more intelligence about what she had unwittingly purchased. Looking up at the stars, Rebecca felt a strange sense of purpose settling over her. The skills that had defined her career, analytical thinking, pattern recognition, intelligence assessment, were suddenly relevant again, not for a government contractor, but for her family's security and future. She had purchased the Blackwood Ranch as a desperate last resort. Now it might become the means of rebuilding everything she had lost, her career, her confidence, and perhaps even her security clearance if she handled this situation correctly. Whatever secrets lay beneath the barn, Rebecca was determined to uncover them on her own terms. Not as a desperate single mother accepting a convenient buyout, but as the intelligence analyst she had trained to be, following evidence to its logical conclusion regardless of pressure or consequence. The twins deserved nothing less than her absolute commitment to discovering the truth about the ranch, about Colonel Harrington's role, about whatever NATO operation continued to unfold on property she now legally owned. With renewed determination, Rebecca began planning her next moves in what had unexpectedly become the most important intelligence operation of her career. The first rays of dawn were just breaking over the eastern hills when Rebecca woke to the sound of vehicles approaching the ranch. She moved swiftly to the window, her heart pounding as she counted 3 black SUVs coming up the driveway in tight formation. Not Colonel Hayes returning as promised, but something more official and potentially more dangerous. "Ellie, Mason," she called, moving quickly to wake the twins. "We need to get dressed right away. We have visitors." The children responded to the urgency in her voice, pulling on clothes without the usual protests. Rebecca had prepared them with a simple story the night before, that the ranch might have been used for government work previously, and official people might come to talk about it. Not the full truth, but enough to help them understand the situation, without frightening them unnecessarily. "Remember what we practiced?" she asked as they finished dressing. The twins nodded solemnly. "Stay together, speak clearly, and if you say the special word, we go to the creek hiding spot," Ellie recited. "Perfect." Rebecca squeezed their shoulders reassuringly. "These are probably just more people like the Colonel yesterday, but we stay prepared, right?" "Like chess," Mason said confidently, "always thinking 3 moves ahead." Rebecca smiled despite her anxiety. Her son had absorbed that phrase from their regular chess games, a principle she had applied throughout her intelligence career and was now teaching her children as a life skill. Always anticipate, always prepare, always have contingencies. By the time they stepped onto the porch, the vehicles had parked in a semicircle in front of the house. 6 men in identical dark suits emerged, their movements coordinated and professional. At the center stood a 7th figure, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a charcoal pantsuit that radiated authority. "Ms. Summers," the woman called, approaching the porch while her colleagues maintained a perimeter. "I'm Director Catherine Blackwood, Department of Defense Special Projects Division. I understand you've had some visitors regarding this property." The surname hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Blackwood, the same as the original ranch owners. This couldn't be coincidence. "Yes," Rebecca acknowledged, keeping her voice steady. "Despite the surge of adrenaline, Colonel Hayes from NATO intelligence visited yesterday with a purchase offer." Director Blackwood's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "I see. And did you accept this offer?" "I requested time to consider," Rebecca replied. "The Colonel gave me 48 hours. A prudent decision?" Blackwood gestured toward the house. "May we speak inside?" My team will remain outdoors. Rebecca hesitated, weighing options. Refusing would escalate tensions unnecessarily. Agreeing would give Blackwood the psychological advantage of entering her space. But the twins were watching, learning from her response to this challenge. Sometimes strength meant engaging rather than withdrawing. Of course, she agreed. The twins can show your team where the best wildflowers are growing near the barn while we talk. It was a calculated move, keeping the children away from sensitive conversation while ensuring Blackwood's team was occupied in a visible location. The director recognized the maneuver with a slight nod of professional respect. Inside, Rebecca offered coffee from the camping stove they had been using. Until utilities were fully restored, Blackwood accepted, her sharp eyes taking in the modest repairs Rebecca had already started. Patched roof sections, reinforced windows, walls cleared of peeling wallpaper in preparation for painting. "You've been busy," the director observed. "Most people would wait for the purchase offer to be finalized before investing effort." "My children needed a safe, dry place to sleep," Rebecca replied simply, "regardless of how long we stay." Once seated at the salvaged kitchen table with steaming mugs between them, Blackwood came directly to the point. "Colonel Hayes was not authorized to make you an offer for this property." The statement hung in the air, its implications expanding like ripples in still water. Rebecca maintained her composure, taking a deliberate sip of coffee before responding. "I suspected as much. Her arrival was too convenient, too soon after my exploration of the facility." Blackwood's eyebrows rose slightly. "You accessed the underground installation." "I did," Rebecca acknowledged without apology, "after discovering multiple security anomalies that triggered my professional training. As I explained to Colonel Hayes, when you sell a property containing classified facilities to a former intelligence analyst, certain discoveries are inevitable." A hint of a smile touched Blackwood's lips. "Your reputation was not exaggerated, Miss Summers. Your security clearance suspension was a travesty, politically motivated rather than merit-based." The casual reference to her professional downfall sent a jolt through Rebecca. "You've reviewed my case?" "Thoroughly," Blackwood confirmed. "Your analysis of vulnerabilities in the Starlight Communications network was not only accurate, but prescient. The weaknesses you identified were later exploited in 2 separate incidents. Your superiors buried your report to avoid program delays and budget scrutiny." The validation from such a high-ranking official was unexpectedly emotional. For months, Rebecca had carried the weight of professional rejection, questioning her own judgment and abilities. To hear her assessment confirmed as correct restored something essential that had been taken from her. "Thank you for that," she said quietly, "but it doesn't explain your presence here or your connection to the Blackwood family." The director set down her coffee mug. "Margaret is my cousin. Our grandfather established this ranch after World War II, though I chose a different path than maintaining the family property." She paused, studying Rebecca carefully. "What do you know about Project Azure Hammer?" The file name Rebecca had seen on the facility's computer system. "Only that it appears to be a NATO counterintelligence operation targeting Russian infiltration of European defense networks. At least, that's what the file headers suggested during my brief access." "That's the official classification," Blackwood agreed. "The surface operation used to justify the facility's existence in NATO records. The reality is considerably more complex and more significant." She leaned forward, lowering her voice, despite the empty house. "What I'm about to share is classified at the highest levels, Ms. Summers. I'm breaking protocol by briefing you without proper clearance reinstatement, but circumstances require expedited measures." Rebecca nodded, her analytical mind fully engaged. "Understood. Project Azure. Hammer began in 1983 as a standard NATO intelligence operation. But during installation of the secure facility beneath the barn, construction crews discovered something unexpected, a metal object of unknown origin, approximately 2 meters in diameter, embedded in the bedrock at a depth of 30 feet. Rebecca's training in maintaining neutral expressions served her well, preventing her from showing the shock she felt. "Extraterrestrial?" she asked, keeping her voice clinical and professional. "Unknown," Blackwood replied. "Initial analysis was inconclusive. The object is composed of alloys not catalogued in any terrestrial database, with energy signatures that defy conventional scientific explanation. It emits periodic bursts of radiation in a mathematical sequence that suggests artificial origin rather than natural phenomenon. And it's still there, beneath the barn." Rebecca made the logical connection. That's why the facility was built around it, rather than the object being moved to a secure laboratory. Precisely. Early attempts to relocate it resulted in energy surges that disabled all electronic equipment within a half-mile radius. After 3 failed extraction attempts, the decision was made to study it in situ, with the NATO intelligence facility providing cover for the real operation. Rebecca processed this revelation against what she already knew. Colonel Harrington wasn't maintaining a NATO intelligence post. He was guarding this object. "Among other duties," Blackwood confirmed, "James was one of our most trusted operatives, a scientist before he was a soldier. He monitored the object's emissions, documented patterns, attempted to decipher the mathematical sequences. His work was promising until his unexpected death. Heart attack, I was told. Natural causes. Yes, but his death created a security crisis. His research was only partially documented in our classified systems. Many of his observations and theories remained in his personal notes, which disappeared from the facility after his death." The picture was becoming clearer. So when Hayes offered to buy the property, she was attempting to secure access to continue searching for Harrington's missing research, Blackwood finished. "Victoria Hayes isn't NATO intelligence, as she claimed. She's part of a specialized Air Force program studying unconventional technologies, what the public would call the government's UFO research division." "And you represent a different program with the same interest," Rebecca deduced. "The Department of Defense Special Projects Division oversees all anomalous discoveries with potential national security implications," Blackwood explained. "Hayes's program is technically under our jurisdiction, but they've developed a certain independence that concerns oversight authorities." Rebecca considered this complex web of competing interests. "So, I've purchased a property containing what might be extraterrestrial technology, currently being sought by at least 2 separate government programs operating with limited coordination." "A succinct summary," Blackwood acknowledged. "Which brings me to the purpose of my visit. Unlike Colonel Hayes, I'm not here to buy your property, Ms. Summers. What are you offering instead?" "Reinstatement," Blackwood stated simply. "Full restoration of your security clearance. A position with Special Projects Division as on-site analyst and facility manager. Continuation of your legitimate ownership of the surface property with appropriate compensation for access to the underground installation." The offer was breathtaking in its scope. Not just financial security, but professional redemption. Everything Rebecca had lost would be restored, with the added value of meaningful work directly connected to what could be the most significant scientific discovery in human history. "And my children?" she asked, her maternal priorities asserting themselves despite the professional opportunity, "would remain with you at the ranch. We would provide funds for complete renovation of the house, installation of state-of-the-art security, and private tutoring to supplement their education." Your family's well-being would be considered essential to operational security. It seemed too perfect. A solution that addressed every aspect of Rebecca's precarious situation while offering intellectual challenge and professional respect. But her analytical training identified the unanswered question at the center of this proposal. "Why me?" she asked directly. "You have thousands of qualified intelligence analysts with active security clearances. Why offer this position to someone who purchased the property by chance?" Blackwood smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her severe features. "Not chance, Miss Summers, pattern recognition. Out of dozens of potential buyers who viewed the property listing, you were the only one who recognized the inconsistencies, who questioned why a dilapidated ranch would have military-grade security features. Your analytical skills identified a puzzle where others saw only a bargain property." She leaned forward. "We need those skills, that perspective, for Project Azure Hammer. The object appears to be accelerating its emission cycles. Something is changing, and we don't understand the implications. Colonel Harrington believed he was close to deciphering the mathematical sequence before his death. We need someone who can approach the problem with fresh eyes and exceptional analytical abilities." Through the window, Rebecca could see the twins showing wildflowers to two of Blackwood's agents, who were crouched at their level, examining the purple blooms with apparent interest. Her children were adaptable, resilient, qualities they would need if she accepted this extraordinary offer. "I would need complete operational transparency," Rebecca stated, beginning to negotiate terms rather than simply responding to the offer. "Access to all historical data on the object, all of Harrington's documented research, and operational independence from competing programs like Hayes's division." "Granted," Blackwood agreed without hesitation. "You would report directly to me with a secure communication channel that bypasses standard protocols, and protection for my children if the object proves dangerous or if Hayes's faction decides to escalate their interest. A security detail would be assigned immediately, remaining in place as long as necessary. Additionally, we would establish evacuation protocols with quarterly drills to ensure readiness." Rebecca nodded, satisfied with these assurances. "When would this arrangement begin?" "Immediately," Blackwood replied. "My team has already brought essential equipment to secure the property perimeter and establish communications with our headquarters. Renovation crews can begin work on the house tomorrow. And Hayes, she's expecting my call within 48 hours. "Let her wait," Blackwood said with a hint of satisfaction. "Her unauthorized offer has been noted in official channels. She'll be recalled to Washington for administrative review before her deadline expires." The twins burst through the front door at that moment, faces flushed with excitement. "Mom," Mason called, "the men showed us a real satellite phone, and they have night vision goggles in their truck." Ellie was equally enthusiastic. "One of them was in Army Special Forces. He showed us his coin and everything." Rebecca exchanged a glance with Blackwood, who had the grace to look slightly abashed. "My team may have been overly forthcoming with your children." "Special Forces operators aren't known for their subtlety," Rebecca observed dryly. "But at least they've made a positive impression." After the director departed with promises to return the following day with formal documentation, Rebecca gathered the twins for a family meeting on the porch. The spring sunshine bathed the ranch in golden light, highlighting not the disrepair, but the potential. Fields that could be restored, a house that could become a true home, a future that suddenly stretched before them with unexpected promise. "I have some exciting news," she began, choosing her words carefully. "We're going to be staying at the ranch permanently, and I've been offered a new job that lets me work right here at home." The twins exchanged glances before breaking into matching grins. "We can keep our rooms?" Ellie asked hopefully. "Better than that," Rebecca explained. "We'll be fixing up the whole house, new roof, new windows, maybe even some special additions you can help design." "Like a game room?" Mason suggested immediately. "Or a science lab?" Ellie countered. Rebecca laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. "We'll have to see what's possible, but yes, something special for both of you." As the twins raced off to plan their dream renovations, Rebecca walked to the barn, drawn to the facility that had changed their fortunes so dramatically. The concrete panel covering the hatch lifted easily now that she knew its mechanism. The keypad accepted her code, and the hatch opened with its hydraulic hiss of welcome. Descending the stairs, Rebecca felt a profound shift in her perspective. Yesterday, this underground chamber had represented an intrusion, a classified facility that complicated her desperate attempt to provide shelter for her children. Today, it represented opportunity, redemption, purpose. The same space transformed not by physical changes, but by context and possibility. In the command center, she approached the reinforced door that had previously been inaccessible without proper biometric credentials. Director Blackwood had provided temporary override codes to grant her initial access while formal authorization was processed. The heavy door opened smoothly, revealing a laboratory space beyond. At the center of the room, protected by a transparent containment field, rested the object that had shaped the ranch's secret history. Approximately 6 feet in diameter, it resembled a perfect sphere of metallic material that seemed to shift between silver and blue, depending on viewing angle. Its surface was inscribed with patterns that might have been writing or mathematical notation, flowing in continuous bands around its circumference. As Rebecca approached, keeping a respectful distance from the containment field, the sphere emitted a brief pulse of blue-white light. Monitoring equipment around the laboratory registered the emission, automatically recording data that would later be analyzed. A workstation nearby contained Colonel Harrington's documented research, the official portions that had been properly entered into classified systems before his death. Pages of calculations, spectrum analyses, emission pattern recordings, and theoretical models filled dozens of digital files. Years of methodical scientific investigation into an object that defied conventional explanation. Rebecca settled into the chair, feeling a sense of connection with the colonel who had worked here before her. Like her, he had been a dedicated analyst, someone who found patterns in complexity, meaning in the apparently random. His notes revealed a brilliant mind grappling with a puzzle beyond human experience, applying rigorous methodology to the ultimate unknown. The last file was dated 3 days before his death, a partial decryption of what he believed to be a mathematical communication sequence embedded in the object's emissions. The final entry read, "Pattern suggests coordinates rather than language, not a message but a location. Verification needed before formal report submission." Rebecca stared at the screen, her analytical mind already beginning to process this. New information against what she knew of astronomical coordinate systems. If Harrington was correct, the object wasn't attempting communication, it was providing directions. But to where? And for what purpose? A noise from the sphere drew her attention. It had emitted another pulse, this one slightly longer and with a different spectral composition than the first. The monitoring equipment dutifully recorded the event, adding another data point to years of observations. In that moment, Rebecca felt a profound sense of purpose wash over her. This was why her security clearance had been suspended, to create the circumstances that would lead her here, to this underground laboratory, to this extraordinary object with its mathematical mysteries. The unfairness that had driven her from Washington, the financial desperation that had led her to purchase a $500 ranch at county auction, all of it had been necessary to bring her to this precise point in space and time. She thought of the twins upstairs, planning their dream renovations with the boundless optimism of childhood. They deserved stability, security, the chance to grow up without the shadow of financial precarity that had haunted them since the layoffs. This opportunity provided all of that and more: a home with history, meaningful work for their mother, and the chance to be part of something truly extraordinary. Whatever the sphere represented, extraterrestrial technology, time displaced, human advancement, or something beyond current scientific classification, it had brought an unexpected gift to Rebecca and her children. Not just financial security through Director Blackwood's offer, but the restoration of professional purpose and personal dignity that had been stripped away by corporate politics and security clearance suspension. As she began organizing Harrington's files for systematic review, Rebecca felt a quiet determination replace the desperation that had driven her just days ago. She had purchased this ranch as a last resort, a Hail Mary attempt to provide shelter for her children before their final eviction notice expired. Now it had become the foundation for rebuilding their lives on terms she could never have imagined. The sphere pulsed again, as if acknowledging her presence and commitment. Rebecca nodded toward it, a gesture of respect for the unknown that would now shape her family's future. "Let's see what you're trying to tell us," she murmured to the enigmatic object. "We've got all the time in the world now." Upstairs, she could hear the twins laughing as they explored their home with new eyes, seeing not what it was, but what it could become. Their resilience had taught her to see possibility where others might see only problems, a perspective that would serve her well in the extraordinary task of deciphering an object from beyond human experience. Rebecca Summers had arrived at the Blackwood Ranch with $472 to her name and a heart heavy with failure. She had found not just shelter, but purpose, not just a house but a home. Not just financial rescue, but professional redemption. Whatever mysteries the sphere held, whatever challenges lay ahead in Project Azure Hammer, she would face them with the same determination that had brought her to this moment of transformation. The desperate gamble of a foreclosed ranch purchased for $500 had become the foundation for a future limited only by imagination and courage. For a woman who had built her career on finding patterns in complexity, it was perhaps the most perfect pattern of all. How complete disaster had transformed into complete opportunity through a single desperate choice made with nothing left to lose. 3 weeks transformed the Blackwood Ranch beyond recognition. Director Blackwood had deployed resources with remarkable efficiency, bringing in specialized crews that worked around the clock to renovate the main house while establishing a secure perimeter that blended seamlessly with the rural landscape. What had been a dilapidated structure with a partially collapsed roof was now a comfortable home, with modern amenities disguised behind a carefully preserved rustic exterior. Rebecca stood on the newly rebuilt porch, watching the twins race their bikes along the smoothly graded driveway that had been filled and resurfaced without losing its appropriately weathered appearance. To casual observers, the ranch would look like a typical Montana property, well-maintained but not ostentatious, giving no hint of the extraordinary facility hidden beneath the restored barn or the security systems integrated throughout the grounds. "They're adapting remarkably well," commented Dr. Eliza Morgan, the child psychologist Director Blackwood had brought in to help the twins transition to their unique living situation. "They've always been resilient," Rebecca replied with maternal pride, "and they think living on a ranch where Mom does secret science stuff is the coolest thing imaginable." Dr. Morgan smiled. "Children their age are naturally flexible, especially when they feel secure. You've done an exceptional job balancing transparency with appropriate boundaries. They understand enough to feel included without being burdened by the full complexity of the situation." Rebecca had made the conscious decision to be partially honest with the twins about her work. They knew she was studying something important. The government discovered, without the potentially frightening details about possible extraterrestrial origin. They understood the security measures as keeping Mom's work safe, an explanation that satisfied their curiosity without triggering anxiety. "Incoming," Dr. Morgan murmured, nodding toward the driveway where a government SUV was approaching. "That's Michael," Rebecca explained, recognizing her former colleague's distinctive driving style. "He's finally arrived to join the research team." The arrival of Michael Chen marked a significant expansion of Project Azure Hammer under Rebecca's leadership. Director Blackwood had approved her request to bring in select personnel with complementary expertise, starting with Michael's background in cryptographic analysis and quantum computing. As Michael emerged from the vehicle, Rebecca was struck by how much her life had changed in just 1 month. From the brink of homelessness to leading a classified government research project, from professional exile to assembling her own team of specialists. The transformation was so profound it occasionally felt surreal, like she might wake to find herself back in that week-to-week rental, staring at a bank balance of 472.18. "Quite a place you've got here," Michael observed as they walked toward the barn that concealed the facility entrance. "Hard to believe it's the same property you described when you called." "Wait until you see what's below," Rebecca replied. "Your security clearance confirmation came through yesterday. You have full access to all project files and the object itself." "Object," Michael repeated the word thoughtfully. "That's a deliberately neutral designation for something potentially extraterrestrial. Neutral terminology helps maintain scientific objectivity," Rebecca explained. "One of Colonel Harrington's protocols that I've continued. We document observations and data without imposing interpretive frameworks prematurely." Inside the barn, Rebecca activated the concealed entrance. The concrete panel slid aside, and the hatch opened with its familiar hydraulic hiss. Michael's expression remained professionally composed, but Rebecca noted the subtle widening of his eyes, the controlled reaction of someone encountering something far beyond standard classified facilities. "Military intelligence never ceases to amaze me," he murmured as they descended the stairs. "Building this beneath a rural Montana ranch without satellite detection or local awareness. The original construction occurred during a period of less sophisticated surveillance technology," Rebecca explained. "Subsequent upgrades have included countermeasures against modern detection methods. The facility's power signature is disguised as agricultural equipment and standard ranch operations." In the 3 weeks since accepting Director Blackwood's offer, Rebecca had immersed herself in the facility's history, reviewing decades of classified files about its construction and operation. The more she learned, the more she appreciated the foresight and ingenuity of those who had established this hidden research base. The command center looked dramatically different from Rebecca's first discovery. The outdated equipment had been replaced with cutting-edge technology, workstations had been reconfigured for optimal workflow, and new monitoring systems provided enhanced data collection from the object chamber. Her leadership style was visible in every detail, functional, uncluttered, designed for collaborative analysis rather than compartmentalized secrecy. "This way," she directed, leading Michael toward the reinforced door to the laboratory. "Prepare yourself. Theoretical knowledge doesn't quite capture the experience of direct observation." The sphere pulsed with blue-white light as they entered, as if acknowledging new presence. Rebecca had noted this pattern consistently. The object seemed to emit signals whenever someone entered the chamber for the first time, a behavior that Colonel Harrington had documented with dozens of test subjects over his 8-year tenure. Michael froze, his scientific composure momentarily suspended as he absorbed the reality of the sphere with its flowing surface patterns and otherworldly luminescence. "It's beautiful," he said finally. the simple word carrying layers of scientific awe and human wonder. Yes, Rebecca agreed. That's something the technical files don't convey. There's an aesthetic quality to it that affects everyone who sees it directly. Harrington documented similar reactions across hundreds of observations. Recovering his analytical focus, Michael approached the containment field that separated the sphere from the laboratory space. The emission patterns, they're what you're working to decode. Specifically, I'm building on Harrington's final breakthrough, Rebecca explained, guiding him to her primary workstation where multiple screens displayed data analyses and mathematical models. 3 days before his death, he determined the emissions weren't attempted communication but coordinate data, essentially a location being transmitted repeatedly with minor variations. Location of what? Michael asked, professionally direct. That's where interpretation becomes challenging. The coordinate system doesn't align with any known terrestrial or celestial mapping. It's either using a reference framework we haven't identified or it's providing directions to somewhere we don't have on any map, Michael finished, grasping the implications immediately. Rebecca nodded. Exactly. My working hypothesis is that the sequences contain multidimensional coordinates, not just spatial location, but temporal parameters as well. She pulled up a 3-dimensional model she had constructed based on Harrington's partial decryption and her own subsequent analysis. If I'm correct, the sphere isn't just identifying a location in space, but a specific point in both space and time. The question is whether it's indicating its origin, its destination, or something else entirely. Like a rendezvous point, Michael suggested, his cryptographic expertise already engaging with the problem. A predetermined meeting location programmed into the device before its arrival. This possibility had occurred to Rebecca as well, though she had been cautious about documenting it officially until she had more evidence. That's one theory worth exploring. If the sphere is essentially a beacon or signal device rather than a complete technology in itself, it could be announcing a specific time-space coordinate for something else to target. The implications hung between them, both thrilling and potentially concerning. A rendezvous point suggested other objects, possibly larger craft, programmed to respond to the sphere's signals. What's the temporal component indicate, future or past? Michael asked, studying the rotating model. If my calculations are correct, and that's still a significant if, the temporal coordinate appears to be approaching. Approximately 47 days from now, the patterns suggest a convergence point. Michael's eyebrows rose. You've been here 3 weeks, made this breakthrough, and there's potentially a deadline 47 days away. Talk about pressure. Rebecca smiled wryly. Welcome to Project Azure Hammer. We're either on the verge of the most significant scientific discovery in human history, or I'm misinterpreting mathematical sequences from an object of unknown origin. Either way, the clock is ticking. Does Blackwood know about the potential time frame? I've submitted preliminary findings with appropriate caveats about confidence levels and alternative interpretations, Rebecca confirmed. Her response was to fast-track your clearance and approve 2 additional specialists joining the team next week. Dr. Amara Okafor in theoretical physics and Dr. Jun Zhang in advanced mathematics. Michael nodded appreciatively. Both brilliant choices. Okafor's work on quantum entanglement could be particularly relevant if we're dealing with technology that manipulates space-time.